All right, everybody. Good morning. Today, this is our e-learning day. We're going to be looking at more of what we talked about yesterday in class concerning this Monroe Doctrine, which is this big policy that we're seeing happen concerning countries becoming independent. So all these countries are gray again, in gray on the map. So for example, we have Mexico, we have Brazil, Colombia, Chile, tons of countries in the Western Hemisphere are becoming independent from the European country that ruled over them for years. And that could be Spain, could be Portugal, etc. All right. And what we talked about yesterday was because they had become independent, there was an interest by Spain, with the help of other countries in the Eastern Hemisphere, like France and Russia, to get that land back. Okay. And when you are talking about countries that are going to utilize their resources to get land back, you need to be thinking about, okay, they're going to use aggression, they're going to use military forces, and that's a problem if you're the United States, because the United States sees three countries bringing their militaries and putting those militaries together for an act of aggression in the Western Hemisphere. Okay. So what the United States is going to implement is this doctrine, and doctrine is basically a statement of policy. All right. And as we talked about yesterday, what this position is from President James Monroe to countries in the Eastern Hemisphere is you can't come over here and create new colonies. You can't come over here and interfere with countries that are free. All those countries that I showed you that are gray on the map, those are free countries. So if they're free, you leave them alone. Okay, that's essentially what it means. And as I showed you yesterday with this political cartoon, Uncle Sam here on the left, you see his hat here, Monroe Doctrine hat, very patriotic hat with the stars on it, thrown in the region of the Western Hemisphere. Now, this is a later political cartoon. So this is from the 1900s, but it still expresses the same idea. Okay. The US's policy, the Monroe Doctrine, is telling all these guys over here in the Eastern Hemisphere that you cannot come over here and take new territory. You can't come over here and colonize. You basically need to stay on your side of the world. We'll stay on ours. All right. And when it was originally created in 1823, the message was no future colonization in the Western Hemisphere. Now, just a few other examples of when this becomes implemented, and you have a lot of political cartoons. Political cartoons express a message, usually in very few words, but in some kind of symbolic images. So we have one. What do you mean by off limits? Well, it's the Western Hemisphere on the left, the Eastern Hemisphere on the right. And, it's more or less, there's the division of the hemispheres. These guys, the Europe on the right, cannot come over because of the Monroe Doctrine. You see the caption. What do you mean by off limits? Here's another one. Okay, Uncle Sam, American image, symbolism, says hands off. That's the United States in the Western Hemisphere, and he's pointing, or his message is directed at the Eastern Hemisphere, Europe, Africa, Asia. Now, there's no African countries that are going into the Western Hemisphere, but this is designed to show you that we're talking about the Eastern Hemisphere at this time. Okay. Now, I'm not going to get too far into the concept of how the Monroe Doctrine was used historically, because we're talking about like 1820s, but it is important to know that the United States as a country, when it becomes stronger, is able to use its military force and its status in the world to basically make the Monroe Doctrine more legitimate. And here's another one. Uncle Sam has this cane here, or stick, that says Monroe Doctrine. You can see here on there. And he's stretched across the whole continent. You can see here, it's all the way down to the very southern tip of South America. You can also see here that his right foot is on Alaska. So it's very much directed at the world. And you'll notice here, he's actually pointing, his eyes are pointing to the west. So he's actually looking at Asia here and not Europe. Because if he was pointing to Europe, he would be pointing this way, which is very interesting. Okay.